Every morning at exactly 9:20 a.m., an elderly man in a worn coat walks into a small Chicago diner. He orders the same thing, hot chocolate and donuts. He sits in the same corner table. He never talks to anyone. Other customers whisper that he's almost scary. But Emily, a struggling 26-year-old waitress, sees something different. She cuts his donuts when his hands tremble. She brings him towels when he's soaked from rain. She treats him like he matters. Then one day he stops coming. A week later, 4 lawyers in suits walk through that diner door with an envelope. That scary old man? He was one of America's most famous heart surgeons. And he just left Emily $750,000, an apartment, and a letter that will change everything. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Waitress helped an elderly man every morning until his lawyers walked in with 4 bodyguards. Chicago awakened with its typical hum of cars, hurried footsteps, and voices crossing without stopping. On Roosevelt Road, where the aged facades told stories no one else wanted to hear, stood a small diner with a faded yellow awning and discolored letters. Grace's Corner wasn't famous or elegant or modern, but it had something few places still preserved: soul. Emily Carter arrived like every day, with her hair hastily pulled back, poorly concealed dark circles, and a scarf that smelled of coffee and home. She was 26 years old, though life had added a few more years to her gaze. Since she was 18, she'd been working there serving breakfasts, cleaning tables, and listening to others' troubles with a patience she didn't always find for her own. She entered the diner at 7 o'clock sharp, greeted Grace, the owner, a woman with a raspy voice and tender heart who complained about everything but loved Emily like a daughter. "How's your mother?" asked Grace as she turned on the coffee maker. "Same. Her fever went up last night, but she's better now," Emily responded without stopping, placing napkins on each table. Sarah, her younger sister, was at university thanks to scholarships, sacrifices, and Emily's double shifts. Her mother, on the other hand, was a constant battle against illness and the system. Emily didn't complain, at least not out loud, but the exhaustion showed in her gestures, in the prolonged silences, and in that coffee she drank without sugar, as if sweetness were an unnecessary luxury. At 9:20 a.m., just when the diner already had its regular customers, a construction worker who always ordered a sausage sandwich, a lady who read horoscopes aloud, and a bread delivery man with an eternal Monday face, the door opened slowly. An elderly man entered with a slow step. He wore a short-brimmed hat, a dark brown overcoat somewhat frayed at the edges, and leather gloves that seemed too fine for this neighborhood. He sat at the corner table by the window, without looking at anyone. He opened a small book, more out of habit than real interest. Emily approached with her notepad, smiling with the kindness that still came naturally to her. "Good morning, sir. What can I get you?" The man looked up with a gruff gesture, almost irritated by the interruption. He had gray eyes, cold, that contrasted with the warmth of the diner. "Hot chocolate and some donuts, please," he said in a deep, dry voice. "Right away," Emily responded without losing her smile. She brought him the order in less than 5 minutes. She placed the plate and cup carefully. When she noticed he was struggling with the knife to cut the donuts, she leaned over discreetly and broke them into medium pieces, like someone who helps without making a fuss. He looked at her sideways, surprised but said nothing. The next day he returned at the same time, and the next as well, always with the same order, always at the same table, always alone. Emily didn't ask his name, nor did he ask for hers, but they began to recognize each other in small gestures. A softer thank you, a slight smile, a napkin placed with more care. Emily learned to bring him the hot chocolate with the exact amount of foam and the donuts already cut. He, in turn, began to leave her round coins as tips, sometimes more than the breakfast cost. One morning, while she was cleaning the counter, she heard a customer comment, "That old man comes every day and doesn't talk to anyone. It's almost scary." Emily didn't respond, just glanced at him sideways, sitting in his corner, leafing through a book he wasn't reading, his gaze fixed on a place that no longer existed. He wasn't scary, he was nostalgic. One Thursday, the sky dawned leaden, with a drizzle that chilled to the bone. The diner was almost empty when he entered, more hunched than usual, with his coat soaked. Emily ran to bring him a small towel. "You're going to catch a cold, Mr. She stopped. She had never asked his name. "Robert," he said, as if reading her thoughts. She smiled. "I'm Emily, but you probably already knew that." "Grace yells my name every 3 minutes." He let out a brief, unexpected laugh. "Thank you, Emily," he said in a different tone, almost warm. That day they ate in silence, but they shared something more. The feeling that for the first time in a long time, someone saw them. Weeks passed. Robert kept coming every morning at 9:20, never later, never earlier. Sometimes they talked about small things, the weather, an old poem, coffee from before that tasted better, but never about themselves, never about the past. Emily noticed that his hands trembled a bit more each day, that he took longer to get up, that sometimes his gaze clouded over while he watched the street. One morning, he didn't come. Not the next day either, nor the one after. Emily pretended not to care, but she looked for him with her gaze every time the door chime rang. On the 4th morning of absence, while she was wiping an empty table, the rain returned, fine, persistent, like a memory. Then she saw him crossing the street with a slow step, without an umbrella. His coat, more worn than ever, absorbed the water as if it no longer had the strength to reject it. Robert entered the diner soaked, took off his hat, and sat in his corner. Emily brought him the hot chocolate without saying anything, cut the donuts, and left him the usual towel. He looked at her with those gray eyes now dimmed. "There are days that weigh more," he said barely in a whisper. Emily didn't respond, just stayed a moment by his side in silence, because sometimes accompanying means saying nothing. When he finished, Robert stood up with difficulty. He walked to the door and opened it. The rain fell without mercy. Emily watched him from behind the counter as he disappeared down the street, as if dissolving into the fog, and she thought with inexplicable sadness, there are people who just need to be seen. The days began to pass with the same cadence as the clock hands in the diner, neither slow nor fast, simply constant. Robert was no longer a stranger. He was part of the landscape of Grace's corner, like the aroma of roasted coffee or the clinking of old dishes. Emily waited for him without realizing she was doing it. Every morning, 5 minutes before 9:20, she checked if the corner table was clean, if there was enough thick hot chocolate, if the donuts were freshly made. She didn't think of it as routine, but as something natural, like breathing. One cold January morning, Robert arrived wrapped in a gray scarf, his hands even more trembling than usual. But there was something different in his face, a softness. He sat down, and for the first time spoke before Emily could ask what he wanted. "Today I dreamed of a forest that no longer exists," he said, looking at the fogged window. Emily served him his usual breakfast without commenting. She sat in front of him, taking advantage of the lack of customers. "And what was that forest like?" she asked, silent, like those in fairy tales. "There were tall oaks and a river with clear water. I walked through it with my father when I was a boy. But that forest is now a parking lot." Emily looked at him surprised. It was the first time he spoke about himself, even if so little. "Where was it?" "In Vermont. But that was an eternity ago. That was the beginning of something new." Robert gradually let fragments of his life slip out. Never too much. Never linear. As if his story were broken into pieces, and he only chose to share some. The least painful ones. He spoke of ancient books no one read anymore. Of forgotten authors, of poems he recited from memory. He quoted phrases in Latin without explanation, as if speaking to an invisible audience. Sometimes he mentioned medicine vaguely, as if he knew the profession, but without going into details. Emily listened attentively. She was fascinated to discover that this man, whom many believed invisible, had inside him an entire library, a rich history hidden under a worn coat. "You know a lot, Mr. Robert," she told him one day while cleaning his table. He barely smiled. Knowing is useless if there's no one to share it with. At night, Emily returned home with her body defeated. Her mother sometimes slept, sometimes delirious with memories of the past. Sarah was silent, surrounded by borrowed books. Emily prepared something for dinner, checked on her mother, and only then could she allow herself to think about what she had experienced at the diner. And almost without realizing it, she thought about Robert. She felt there was an old sadness in him, a loneliness that didn't come only from age, but from losses he never mentioned. There was a quiet dignity in his gestures, an elegance that matched the way he dressed. One afternoon, while closing the diner, she found a napkin with a handwritten verse. Everything that leaves stays a little in the cracks of the soul. No signature. But she knew it was from him. As the weeks went on, the connection between them grew stronger, without haste, without too many words. Robert asked about Sarah, about Emily's mother's health. He listened carefully, gave gentle advice without imposing. Sometimes he told stories that seemed from another time, about a room full of books in Paris, about a piano in Vienna, about a woman who liked red wine and danced barefoot. "Did you travel a lot?" Emily asked. "Maybe, or maybe I just read too much," he responded enigmatically. One morning, Robert arrived without the book he always brought. He just sat down and looked at Emily with moist eyes. "Emily, do you know what's hardest about getting old?" "No, what?" "That people stop seeing you. They greet you without looking at you. They serve you out of obligation. They talk to you as if you were deaf or stupid, as if you had nothing more to offer." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She didn't know what to say. He continued, "But you talk to me as if I still mattered. And that, my dear, that's worth more than gold." She approached slowly and placed her hand on his. It was cold, fragile. "You matter, Mr. Robert. A lot." He smiled, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. "Thank you for not treating me like an old piece of furniture." That night, Emily walked home under a clear sky, but with a heavy heart. There was something in Robert's eyes that left her uneasy, as if he were saying goodbye without warning. The next day, she waited for him, as always. She prepared the hot chocolate, cut the donuts, cleaned the corner. But Robert didn't appear. Not the next day, nor the following one. Emily feigned normalcy, continued serving coffee, cleaning tables, laughing with customers, but her eyes returned again and again to the door. Nothing. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air, like a book someone closes in the middle of the story. 7 days passed, 7 mornings without the door of Grace's corner opening at 9:20, 7 cups of hot chocolate that weren't served, 7 napkins that Emily placed on the corner table and removed intact when closing the diner. Robert didn't return. Emily tried to convince herself that maybe he was sick, that perhaps he had traveled, that he would return. But every time she heard the sound of the chime above the door, her chest tightened and loosened in disappointment, seeing it wasn't him. Grace, who observed everything with silent mother's eyes, told her one morning, "Not everyone leaves forever, Emily. Some return, in other forms." Emily didn't respond, just kept cleaning the coffee maker. It was a week after Robert's last visit, on an ordinary Wednesday, when everything changed. It was close to 10 a.m. when 2 men in suits entered the diner. They didn't seem to be from the neighborhood. One was tall, with white hair, perfectly combed, leather briefcase in hand. The other, younger, had a firm posture, and the look of someone accustomed to not asking permission. Emily tensed. "Good morning. Can I help you with something?" "Emily Carter?" asked the older man. "Yes, that's me," she responded, leaving the tray on the counter. The man opened the briefcase and took out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. "My name is Michael Davidson. I'm the attorney for Dr. Robert Sullivan. We come on behalf of the will." Emily felt the air escape from her lungs. Dr. Robert Sullivan passed away 3 days ago at his home, accompanied by his personal nurse and his lawyers. He had terminal cancer. He decided to live his last months discreetly. Grace, who had heard from the kitchen, came out drying her hands on her apron. Robert was a doctor? The lawyer nodded. And not just any doctor. He was one of the most renowned cardiologists in America. He published dozens of research papers, operated on hundreds of patients, received international awards. His name is in medical encyclopedias. But when he received his diagnosis, he left everything. He sold part of his shares, closed his private practice, and decided to live as just another man. Emily said nothing. She felt the words floating far away, as if someone else were hearing them for her. Before dying, he personally wrote his will, continued the lawyer with a softer tone. And you, Miss Carter, are included. He handed her the envelope. Emily took it with trembling hands. What? What did he leave? The second man, who until that moment had remained silent, spoke with a firm voice. An old apartment in Lincoln Park, entirely in your name. $750,000 transferred to an account that you must activate with this document, and a letter written in his own hand. Emily didn't know if she was dreaming. She looked at Grace, who had a hand on her chest and eyes wide open. Are you sure? Emily stammered. Why me? The lawyer smiled almost sadly. Because according to his words, you were the only person who saw him as a human being, not as a patient, not as an old man, not as a burden, simply as Robert. Hours later, sitting on the wooden bench in her house's kitchen, Emily opened the letter. The sheet was thick, with golden edges. Robert's handwriting, firm despite the tremors, filled the paper with blue ink. Emily, when you read this, I will no longer be in this world. But don't be sad. I don't want that for you. I want you to know something very simple. You gave me back my life. I entered that diner looking for silence. I found your voice. I wanted to disappear, and you made me visible. I thought no one else would touch me with tenderness, and you cut my donuts as if you were my daughter. You listened to me when I couldn't even stand myself. You spoke to me without fear, without pity, without compassion in the wrong sense. Thank you for that. I leave you the little I have left, not because you need it, but because you deserve it. Use this gift for whatever your heart dictates. You didn't earn it out of pity, Emily. You earned it through genuine love, through humanity. Don't say goodbye to me. Just keep living the way you lived with me, with dignity, with compassion, with courage. Until always, Robert, Emily cried, not from sadness. She cried like someone opening a wound they didn't know they had. She cried for Robert, for her mother, for her childhood, for every customer she had served without being seen. Grace sat beside her, handed her a glass of water, and stroked her hair. That man saw you, Emily. He truly saw you. The following days were a mixture of paperwork and emotions. Emily, with the lawyer's help, activated the account, signed the apartment documents, and discreetly organized the transfer of her mother to a better clinic. She paid off debts, bought Sarah a new laptop for university, renovated the old apartment Robert had left her, preserving the books and antique paintings. But the most important thing was happening inside her. A seed had been planted. One morning, while reviewing one of the boxes Robert had left in the apartment, she found a notebook. It had black covers, worn, full of notes. They weren't medical notes. They were stories, memories, fragments of life. Elderly men and women, patients, friends, strangers whose stories Robert had written with care and respect. Emily spent hours reading, laughing, crying. And then she knew. She knew her life could no longer continue the same. That Robert hadn't just left her money. He had left her a purpose. Life didn't change suddenly for Emily. It changed in details, in breakfasts without rush, in days without bills that suffocated her, in nights when she could read without falling asleep over the book, in walks with her mother, now with better treatment, who was starting to smile again, in Sarah, who could finally leave one of her part-time jobs to concentrate on her medical studies. It changed, above all, in the way Emily saw the world, as if every corner of Chicago now had a nuance she hadn't noticed before. A corner with an old man reading in solitude, A park bench occupied by someone staring into the void. An elderly woman asking for half a coffee in a low voice. Robert stayed with her in memories, in the letter, in the books he left, in a phrase he had written in his notebook. Old people aren't ghosts. They're entire libraries that no one visits. The apartment in Lincoln Park was old but full of light. Emily decorated it with plants, paintings, and a small table where she placed a photo of Robert, the only one she found, taken decades earlier when he still practiced as a doctor. In that photo, his smile was wider, but the eyes were the same. Over time, Emily resumed an old dream, studying literature. She enrolled in night classes at a community college. She started writing. She didn't know if she had talent, but she had something to say. Something that had grown in her since that first morning at the diner when she cut donuts for a grumpy old man who turned out to be the most important man in her life. But what really changed her path was one autumn afternoon. She was sitting in the diner, now under Grace's management, when she saw an elderly man enter, hunched, with simple clothes. He sat alone, ordered a coffee, and looked out the window, with an expression Emily knew well, that of someone who no longer expects company. Then an idea sprouted. With Grace's help, some neighborhood volunteers, and the savings she still had from the inheritance, Emily launched a small project, Robert's Table. It started as something simple. Once a week, the diner offered free lunches to elderly people who lived alone. It wasn't charity, it was companionship. A long, shared table without rush. Simple dishes served with dignity. No questions, no paperwork. The first week there were 5, then 15. By the next month, they no longer fit in the space. Emily didn't just serve food, she listened, took notes, asked for names, stories. She discovered entire worlds behind wrinkles and canes. "Why do you do this?" asked a local journalist who came to cover the initiative. Emily responded with a calm smile. "Because someone taught me that everyone deserves to be seen." Until the last day, the project grew. They moved to a larger space but maintained the spirit of the original diner. Grace's Corner transformed into a community center. There were meals, poetry readings, writing workshops for older adults, intimate concerts. Emily also began compiling the stories she heard. With the encouragement of an independent publisher, she published her first book, The Invisible Ones, Real Stories of Elder Souls. In the dedication, a simple phrase, "To Robert, who saw me and taught me to see." The book was a modest but touching success. She received letters from readers across America. Teachers began using it in classrooms. Community libraries featured it prominently. Emily continued with her discreet style. She didn't like the spotlight. She preferred the quiet mornings preparing, coffee, the afternoons with elderly people laughing around the table, the small moments of silent connection. One morning, while serving hot chocolate to a lady humming tangos, Sarah entered the diner with shining eyes. "Have you seen this yet?" she said, showing her phone. It was news on a digital newspaper. Robert's Table, the Chicago project transforming loneliness into community. Emily just smiled. "We didn't do it for press. We did it for them." "And for you," said Sarah, hugging her, "and for Robert." Months passed. Grace, tired but happy, decided to retire. She officially ceded the diner to Emily. Not for money, but for merit. "This place is more yours than mine," she said with tears in her eyes. Emily renovated the space, maintaining the soul of the place. The long table was kept in the center. On the wall, a watercolor painting of Robert's face made by one of the volunteers. Below it, a phrase, "Thank you for treating me like a human being." One afternoon in late autumn, the diner was full. Elderly people holding hands, young volunteers serving soup, laughter mixing with the sound of a radio playing old jazz. Sarah was distributing books. Grace, retired but present, helped collect cups. Emily, in a blue apron and serene expression, served coffee as always. She looked around and saw what had become reality, a table where no one was invisible. She felt a lump in her throat, and then, like a whisper coming from time, she heard in her memory Robert's firm and gentle voice. "Thank you for treating me like a human being." I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, God bless you, and see you in the next story.